Oh, right, thank you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session with Controller. Richard Klein, Controller BBC4, no stranger to any of you, I'm sure, is with us. Richard's previous incarnation, obviously, head of documentaries, champion of the Indies within the BBC. He's an eclectic Renaissance man. He's a bit of a maverick within the BBC. It's 10 years since BBC4 was given birth, and Richard is its third controller. He's been there for 4 years, and what a successful tenure it's been. Here's a clip to see what I mean. Well, Richard, let's start with massaging you with the comforting oils of congratulation, because 10 years, you are the most successful controller so far, given this data. You've averaged the highest AI scores across all of the BBC channels, a currently broadcast digital channel of the year, BAFTA shortlisted for lots of things, including Borgen winning the best international category. And this Christmas saw your amazing week, which you're averaging a 2% share due to the heavyweights like the Royal Institution Christmas lectures. The first, which was watched by over 1 million viewers, 4.1%, and hugely strong arts performances. And last year, the audience share rose by an 18%, which is staggering, to an average of 1.3. Now, I suppose the question is, are you delighted with that? Yes, but given the tensions within the BBC, is there enormous pressure to build on that?
That's a really interesting way of putting it, actually. There isn't actually enormous pressure at the BBC to build on that. Certainly not in terms of share, and there actually never has been. I don't think BBC4 has ever been seen a channel which is meant to be chasing share. I've always felt the more important mark of success is reach for BBC4. In other words, what I think is BBC4 should be a channel where everybody, where as many people as possible feel there might be something in it for them, so that it's not a channel that I think people necessarily would have on all day. Well, not on all day, but if they would just flick it on when they come at night and leave it on. It's a channel where I hope people make a reason to come and see something, come and watch it, and then go and do something else. And we should be appealing to as broad a footprint of that as possible. And I'm pleased to say that reach has also risen. And I think maintaining, there's been no pressure on that either, in truth. I've actually rather just seen it as something that I wanted to do. I don't really like the idea of making programs that no one watches. I mean, I can't see the point of it, personally. And I also believe fundamentally that we're in the entertainment business. Everybody who's in television is in the entertainment business. It's just how you choose to entertain people. I like to think I'm in show business. People don't watch, in my view, television to be educated. They don't go, oh, I think I need a bit of education tonight. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to learn. Now, that might be the consequence of what they take. So, no pressure, I think. I've had no targets, I don't think, not that I can remember, which isn't, I might have targets actually, I just don't know what they are actually, sorry. That's a good point, actually. I might well have targets. Hopefully I've beaten them. Yeah, what's his space? But, and going forward, which you may want to pursue, I think there are some questions there. Yeah.
Don't ever say going forward again.
Okay, no, fair enough. That's, okay, I recognise that's a bad thing to say. I'll try not to use the word challenging too often either.
But there is pressure. There's massive pressure across the BBC. I mean, this time last year, you didn't even know whether the channel was going to be here at all. And you have survived, which is fantastic, because it is an amazing channel. But your budget has been slashed. How are you coping with that?
Well, I mean, the BBC4's budget has been reduced significantly, and I'm sure people here are partly here because they want to find out what the opportunities are. And the reality is that BBC4's opportunities are much reduced. There's no doubt going forward, and we'll come to the positives as well in this, but there are major genres are no longer being funded on the channel, notably drama, entertainment, and history. Those have all gone. And it is quite a big cut in my origination flex, in other words, in the areas where I have flexed to originate. There are things I've got to do. I've got to make the proms. That takes up a certain amount of money. There's certain things which have to be done. In the other area, it is a big, there has been a big change. So I think it will be quite difficult to certainly maintain that share. I don't know if it's even possible. As I said, I think, if you excuse me, the word is challenging. Reach, I think, will also be a bit of a struggle. I don't think the channel is broken, so I have no plans to change the basic tenure of it, the tone and what it's about going forward. But it's the biggest problem that we have. It's the biggest headache. There is, you can't get around a couple of big facts. The BBC was asked to make a 16% reduction. That's £700 million out of a £3.5 billion budget. In vision, that's television, it was 300 and something million pounds out of 1.7. Those are big numbers. They are happening, and there will be, people will see it. And I think the creative community who supplies programming to BBC4 and indeed other channels will feel that a bit, because there's going to be fewer things to commission. And I regret that. I think it's a real shame that BBC4 is losing drama, history, entertainment. And there you go. It is a shame. Who else would, I don't welcome it. Who would welcome that kind of cut? That said, we were tasked with losing that kind of money. It's a government-led decision. All arts and creative community programs have been hit that amount of money, I think, roughly speaking, those losses. And my job is to make the best of it and to carry on trying to make sure that BBC4 feels like a really entertaining place where you want to come and watch some programs, and that's what I intend to do.
Yes, I'm going to come back to delivering quality first in a minute, but it's interesting you're talking about your viewership and not making things that nobody wanted to see. I don't know if you endured Elizabeth Murdoch's McTaggart out of a sense of duty, yes, but in amongst the unintentional satire that she was delivering, there was one interesting little piece where she talked about a community, where that viewers should be a community, and of course with all new technology and social networking and so on, there are communities building up. Now, I can't think of a better placed channel to have community in terms of its viewership than you, but you're very eclectic. You leap around all over the place in interest, so it's almost like you're avoiding it.
Well, in a bit like you, I'm not keen on the phrase going forward. I'm never keen on the word community, because I'm damned if I know what it means, and I've never been part of one. I don't deliberately avoid the people, actually. I'm sure there are various social networking things, not that I'm part of any of them.
I sort of mean about fostering a type of...
the thing I was going to say was, I think that one of BBC4's strengths, which I think is a good thing, is there is no subject I don't think is interesting, that we can make interesting. There is no area that we couldn't reconsider or recalibrate or curate and have a look at. We'll make everything, the obvious, interesting. I think the consistency on 4 is the tone of it, is our approach. Always propositional, always trying to find something interesting, a position, not the final word on the subject matter, but a word on the subject matter. That, I think, is a consistency, which means if you have a frame of mind that likes that kind of thing, and I think that is quite a broad group of people who like to think differently, as I put it, will always find something in there that'll appeal to them, or they like the fact that we're always inquiring and thinking on their behalf, editorializing, and then going, here's a way of looking at it. Come on, let's have some fun and do that. I think for quite a large number of people, they like doing that sometimes, and that's what we're offering. Which means I have the ability, the opportunity to, as you say, buzz about and do all sorts of different things. It suits me as it happens. So.
It's almost impossible, isn't it, not to stamp your personality on a channel when you're a controller. I mean, you're the third controller. It's been very different up until this point. And some people have pointed out, since you've taken over, it has a little bit of a masculine bent. There's things that, I know that you're interested in, engines and guitar heroes and really sort of peculiar little things. Are you ever tempted to try and actually sublimate your own personality, to try and bring in things that you're not interested in? Do you always have to be interested in them to buy something? There might be stuff out there that other people are that you aren't.
I think that is a good question, and it's a fair one. I'm not surprised to hear you think it might feel slightly more masculine. I think that's not unlikely that would be the case. I like to think that if I'm looking at it, if it is interesting in and of its own right, then I think it should be interesting to somebody out there. I do have personal interests. It is true that I cycle and I'm German and I go to Iceland quite a lot, and you will note that I've done things on that.
And you commute down the A3.
Yes, okay, 303. Yeah, that's a personal.
That's really going to matter to people in Oban.
It has to be said that show's done over 2 million. And
it's a lot of commuters.
Well, what it shows is actually it turns out to be quite interesting, and my tastes are impeccable. There are things, for example, I personally am not a huge fan of musicals, I wouldn't say, or varieties isn't an area I'm personally interested in, although however, what I recognise is, musicals is quite a low culture, if you want. People can be quite sniffy about it. The idea you might go and see Les Mis 20 times, some people think, gosh, that's a bit mad. Mind you, going to Swan Lake several times isn't. And I think us, BBC4, saying we're going to look at musicals and we're going to try and reconsider them and say, try and write one. Try writing 8 different songs that are really good in the context of a story, and try being the main guy, the main woman singing it. So reassessing the artistic nature and how good you've got to be in a certain way, that's a very beautiful thing. It's on a subject I'm not particularly interested in. That did over 1 million. I suspect that isn't wholly lots of blokes. I mean, that's an example. There are others. So we've done a number of shows which I think aren't sort of history-based, which tends to be quite masculine, but I've tried to introduce with things like If Walls Could Talk, or 17th Century History for Girls, or She-Wolves. I've tried to introduce a more female perspective on things like history in a way of saying, a question I asked Helen Castor, who fronted She-Wolves. I said, I want to know what the world of Queen is in early England. What would be your power? You have no direct power, but you must have some. And how is it? And how do you flex it? Does it involve sex? Does it involve the fact that you can make your son or daughter? You know, is it power through descendancy? Those are quite interesting questions about how early England functioned. And so I've tried, I think in that sense, to introduce some elements of female interest.
Yes,
it doesn't obsess me, by the way.
No,
I actually don't, I think it's interesting in itself. That, you know, it's an interesting question.
Yes, I wasn't accusing you of being a thinking man's Dave.
No. Although I do like Dave, actually,
yeah,
as it
I love
happens.
Dave as well, and I'm a girl.
And when I'm watching it, I don't have to think very much.
I want to take back to you know, delivering quality first. I didn't mean to have a laugh in my voice there. Because, like, for instance, let's talk about Dirk Gently, which, you know, I have a personal bugbear with him, because that was absolutely brilliant. You know, 3-parter, fabulous homegrown drama. You know, Douglas Adams' great adaptation and everything. Went down a storm and then had to be cancelled. Now, how in English vocabulary does cancelling something as high quality as that, there's a huge Twitter outcry about it, and then having to replace it with, you know, as well, equal quality, you know, Scandinavian noir criminal dramas, how is that delivering quality first? Why not just spending less money?
Well, in part it is spending less money. 2 small corrections. I have a budget for drama. Before
you answer this, could I just see a clip? Because we've got a clip.
No, okay, do.
I'm banging on about it, and I just want to see it stick gently.
Watch it again. Very good.
Yes, you were saying.
So, well, firstly, there are 2 separate parts of the thing. I didn't, as you put it, cancel Dirk Gently in order to fund Scandinavian dramas. They're funded separately. And they cost, trust me, a whole lot less than Dirk Gently. They come in at a very good price for the license fee. The second thing is, I didn't actually cancel Dirk Gently. We commissioned 3 of them, and that was that. There was no more, there weren't any more written. And there were no plans at the time of commissioning, or indeed of them going out, of necessarily doing any more. I just simply said, we played 1 out, it did quite well, we commissioned 3 more. And I'm really not sure if BBC4 is the place that should be overly playing, particularly in our originations, more and more of the same thing. There are certain things which we do hold on to, and notably some of those dramas on a Saturday night, but they come in at a very good cost per hour. I think things like dramas, I really think that my job is to be, I mean, if I hadn't have done Dirk Gently, would I have been able to afford Holy Flying Circus, for example, or some other pieces we've got coming up? I'm not sure.
You see,
well, no, I am sure we couldn't do it.
Drama on BBC4 was absolutely exemplary. I mean, it's great. All the, you know,
well, in the past, still is until next April.
Well, you've got coming up. You've got Hotel Taliban coming up. The story of you know Sean Langham's kidnapping. You've got Kenny Everett, 90 Minutes,
which is wonderful.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. But that's massively shrunk from the things that you were doing before.
We've got 2 more things which I can talk about, which we've already announced. One is The Room at the Top, which we're playing out very shortly, actually, which is the adaptation of John Brain book, and that is a fantastic piece of work. It's a 2x60 drama set in the 50s. A young working class man who works in a factory and but in the sort of the office bit, and makes a play for his boss's wife, but he's from the wrong side of the track and actually has an affair with somebody else's wife. It's a very, very powerful piece of social drama, I think. And then the Kenny Everett, which is, I have to say, a really wonderful piece of work. It's warm and lovely. And then at the beginning of next year, we have, I think, a very 2-part powerful piece. We've adapted an Alan First book called Spies of Warsaw, which is set in just pre-war, just before the war starts, in Poland, with David Tennant starring. And that's a big co-production with both BBC America, Polish television, which was a bit weird. I had to go and do a press conference there, which was a bit weird. Lovely, delightful, but just not what I was expecting. It's like this, you know, like cameras everywhere, and it's like, oh, you come. Anyway, wasn't used to it. So we're not over, and there's 2 or 3 more pieces yet to come, which we're still finalising. It will be a shame. Can I just say, look, I regret losing drama, and I'd love to keep it, but it's going. To some extent, what drama did do for the channel, it's sort of done. It was very good in a technical sense of making aware to lots of people who perhaps might have thought BBC4 is a rather stuffy, high-end sort of place, that actually we do big, broad dramas that you might like. Hattie being a very good example. And in that sense, it's done its job. It did a very good job in publicising the channel. You could argue the impact of history going and the impact of entertainment going will be more difficult to deal with. Not creatively necessarily, because I love doing dramas. And it's a shame, and I'm sorry you're going to miss Duck Gently. We'll play them out for you again.
Massively, yes. Let's see me later. The other things you lose, bizarrely, are comedy. I mean,
no, we don't lose comedy. Comedy's still there.
I know, but I was talking about the ones that you lose to other channels. I mean, someone described you as a feeder for BBC Two, which I think is the biggest insult. I think it's like feeders that people give burgers to morbidly obese people. I mean, you started off in the thick of it, genius, absolutely fantastic. A wonderful 2012. We've got a clip on a minute. I'll show you that. And of course, Lead Balloon. Now, it's not your job to think up ideas for BBC Two, is it?
No.
Should they not be doing it themselves?
And they do. They do a great job in coming up with, Rev is a comedy show that I would have loved to have had. I think one of BBC4's jobs is to find and take up new talent and practice and see if something really works, and if it really works and it looks like they might get a bigger audience, to push it forward to a bigger channel. I honestly have no problem with that.
Let's have a look at 2012, because that was just an absolute, startlingly brilliant piece of comedy. Here's a clip.
It was great fun and very timely. I'm pleased about that.
And wouldn't you have preferred to have hung on to it so the audience came to you? Yeah. How does that work?
Well, in this case, Cheryl Taylor came to see me and said, we think 2012 should move to BBC Two because it'd be... listen, ultimately, yes, of course I have an ego, but my job and our job at the BBC is to do the best thing for viewers, and I mean this. And the best thing for the viewers, it was determined, was for it to play on a major terrestrial channel. Well, that's what we did. Good decision. 1.2, 1.4 million people, 1.5 million people, that's more than I was getting. I was getting 3 and 4 and 500,000, and I don't think that's a problem. Can I say the same thing applies to new talent? I think one of the jobs of BBC4 is to find and use and experiment with new talents who can come to the channels, and if they then go forward and work on other channels. Ian Stewart, who started on BBC4, now on BBC Two, no problem with that. Actually, Brian Cox, who's obviously a pretty big star, began his career in television on BBC4.
Well, I talked about the thing...
I don't go, I'd love to do this, by the way, but it's a reality, and I've got no problem with it happening.
You're being astonishingly stoic. I'd be in tears by now. We're talking about the things that you're losing, but let's talk about the things that you're left with. I'm particularly interested in arts. Now, you said a while ago that you weren't in competition with Sky Arts. You're not on the same ballpark at all. News just in, you are.
Okay.
They think they're in competition with you, big style. It doesn't matter what you think, they think you're the competition.
Yes.
And they have got bottomless pockets, and they really are going big guns to try and beat you.
Great. I look forward to it.
How are you responding to that?
Well, in some senses, I think having another sort of aggressive, as it were, arts player in town is actually rather a good thing. I quite enjoy it, and Sky Arts does do things that I covet a bit occasionally. I thought their Leonardo Live was rather good, but I still say that we're in a different area of the market. BBC4 basically spends pretty much 95% of its money on programmes and 5% on promotions. And I'd wager that it might be something the other way around at Sky Arts. Not completely, obviously, but that's a different thing. So Sky Arts is supporting the arts in their way, and we support it in ours. And I'd say something else, in my opinion. I think BBC4 is very much an editorialised, curated channel. In other words, we are looking very hard to make this channel feel like a place that anybody can come to, not just who are interested in arts. That's why it's not called arts. It's called BBC4. And that's, again, a different sensibility. Sky runs a stable of essentially niche channels, which is focusing on particular, genre-based channels. That's not BBC's model or BBC4's model. So clearly, we're in competition to some extent. There are times when I know that we might be chasing the same performance or whatever, and sometimes we win and sometimes we don't. But if you look at what we do on Saturday nights, well, we're competing with Sky Atlantic on that night, I suspect, and hopefully quite successfully. If you look at our Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, when we have things like Storyville and so on, well, then we're competing with, well, at one very small level, a certain point of Channel 4 at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. You know, I just don't see Sky Arts as being the competitor out there. And, you know, if we're competing for eyeballs, I think BBC4 is pretty successful at the moment. And, you know, I'm happy to face down competition.
Is there some kind of subliminal thing that goes on when you're commissioning, though, you can't help but respond to the way that they programme arts, and they're almost entirely celebrity-led, and you know there has to be a really big name up fronting it. You know, in fact, and in some respects, you followed suit with some things. We've got a clip of part of the Shakespeare Uncovered clip. This is Ethan Hawke, The Witches of Macbeth.
Yes.
The clip. Now, it's fantastic getting somebody like that, because clearly you can't afford Ethan Hawke if he was charging Ethan Hawke, but it's the lure of the intelligence and the integrity and the history of the BBC, I presume, that manages to get people like that on.
Well, there were 6 of those shows that were...
David Tennant.
And they came as part of an overall package, actually, that went slightly along with The Hollow Crown as an overall deal with HBO. I think it was HBO that we did the financing deal for. And I thought they were rather good pieces, but what's interesting is that did 150,000 on my channel. And the James Shapiro, who no one's ever heard of, but he happens to be a professor emeritus at Harvard, I think, and is one of the top 2 experts on Shakespeare. His series, which I'd asked him to make about Shakespeare as a Jacobean playwright, not an Elizabethan one, did 500,000. So what's interesting is BBC4 viewers are not star-struck, as it were, and that one did a lot worse. Well,
does that mean then that you can resist the star-led
arts content? I think it's for purpose. I mean, when Stephen Fry says, I want to do a film about Wagner, I'm interested straight away. There's an intelligent, erudite man who's got something to say. If it's, I won't name anybody else, and they just feel like stuck on, then it won't really work. I actually thought that Ethan Hawke's piece was quite good, actually. But I felt that James Shapiro was a much more reflective, and it felt like a real strong piece of work, because he genuinely kind of reassessed Shakespeare, and from then on you see him, well, yeah, actually 15 of his plays were written when James I was on the throne. He was the King's Man. Completely different writer, and some of his more difficult plays come out of that time, reflecting a very much more difficult moment in history. So, look, it's horses for courses. I'm very happy, you know, I have Timothy Spall doing me, floating around England on his barge. That was great fun and lots of fun. We had Richard Wilson doing Us Drives, which is a hoot. I'm really up for those kind of programs. They're probably not ultimate 9 o'clocks. Actually, they're more pre-Watershed 8:30s, where they feel warm and entertaining and enjoyable, but with a little bit of a BBC4 feel to them, or maybe 10 or 10:30. The centre, I think, pretty much, not always, that's where I'm looking for expert-driven, propositional, and a new idea.
Yes, well, let's talk about what you're looking for, because with the difficulty in having so many of your budget cut, and as you mentioned earlier, you've got things that you're committed to at the beginning of the year that's actually non-negotiable. You have to cover those things. How much is left for new commissions?
Well, there is a full art slate and a full music slate.
What's the budget for that?
What's the total budgets for them? I don't know what the money is. The hours, there's probably about 80 hours of arts and 80 hours of music, roughly speaking.
And is that full up yet?
No. We're very much open for business. I mean, I'm commissioning is about 12 to 18 months ahead. So quite all of this year, 12, 13, the year goes from March 13 to March 14. That's how our new year goes. So up to April 13, I'm pretty much fully commissioned up. The first 3, 4, 6 months of the next year of 13 are beginning to be commissioned up. After that, I'm looking for things. We've got, you know, there's money in science and there's money in documentaries, arts and music. And the thing I would say is, given that we've lost this large chunk of history and entertainment, I have said to all the commissioning editors, we can't do outright, as we are doing later on this year, the 100 Years' War, which we're doing a big thing with Dr. Gina Ramirez, called The Long Divorce, actually. I know, it's 100 years, it feels like it's sometimes. We can't do that, outright history. But you can do something like the piece she did for us this year, which is called The Private Lives of Kings, which is about illuminated manuscripts and the way that manuscripts are an incredibly interesting artistic vehicle to describe a period and how it thought about itself.
It's just doing history by subterfuge.
I don't think it is, actually. I mean, to understand illuminated manuscripts, it's quite good to know what the period is. Context is everything. I'll give you another example. Later on, well, at the beginning of next year, we will be involved in a major partnership with the South Bank, who are spending the entire year celebrating Alex Ross's book called The Rest is Noise, which is the story of 20th century classical music. And in my opinion, people who don't like 20th century classical music, and by 20th century classical music, I mean that stuff that goes like that, okay? That is kind of what some people think is 20th century, okay? That is irredeemable from most people's points of view. However, what is really interesting about Alex Ross's book is he explains not why it's any good or not, but why we got it. And that is quite interesting. So one of the reasons why John Cage produces what John Cage produces is because he is a product of a 50s and 60s America, particularly New York and possibly also the West Coast. And that's quite interesting. So John Cage becomes less of a cartoon two-dimensional figure and a rounded figure. And I think in that sense, putting history into arts programs is a really good thing. The thing that doesn't work is to be told again and again, this classical music from the 20th century is really good, you're just not listening to it hard enough. Boulez is great, you just don't recognize it. Because eventually you go, look, I've heard it, I don't need to be, you know. But if I said to you, you've got to understand about Boulez, he kind of comes from this kind of Marxist world. He comes from a place which says you don't have to care about the audience. And he also comes from a place that says, you know, Second World War, it was so ghastly, we've got to, you know. You start to kind of understand who, it doesn't necessarily make you like the music better, but at least you understand why we've got the bloody stuff. So I would say, although you say history by subterfuge, I think it's a little unfair, and I'm defending myself on that one. But I do think context is useful, and as I say, I think there are quite a lot of music and arts programs that spend too long telling you, this is really good, you're just too sick to understand it.
Well, in terms of perhaps competing for viewers with Sky Arts and their bottomless pockets, is there an element as well that's in some ways, some of the independents, you're competing with Sky for their attentions as well, yes. Because they're going to take, the really, you know, good ones are going to take stuff there first.
I totally agree.
And maybe come to you second. Now that's a shame. It was never always thus, was it?
No, there's no doubt that Sky have really kind of upped their game in terms of funding new projects and looking for new projects, and that the BBC is no longer first port of call. It's actually true of all genre, but certainly arts, music, and so forth. You know, Channel 4's in that game too. Yeah, it's more competitive. It's also more competitive, and we don't win as easily with things like partnerships and relationships. It's really critical, I think, for BBC4 to have strong relationships with big institutions, or even small ones for that matter, where we can have a partnership, where we can extend and go beyond just here's a television program. We're doing a big partnership next year with Reba. We're re-examining late 20th century architecture, the story of how Britain looks the way it does through some of the bigger names, Peter Grimshaw and Richard Rogers and James Sterling and so forth, in a sort of major reassessment of it. And there's no doubt that Sky have been very successful in forging relationships, Hay on Wye is one example, by major sponsorship deals, which the BBC is unable to do because it's not, we don't feel a good way of spending the license fee. It's a commercial decision which Sky has every right to do. Yeah, it's competitive. I don't mind, actually. I mean, there's enough for all of us, I think. And it sort of is quite useful as well to encourage being a bit inventive. I mean, it has definitely made me think, okay, how do I form relationships that has value, and how can I do more for the audiences, which is what it's all about.
Almost every answer to the questions I put for you go, I don't mind. Yeah, honestly, what do you mind about? What makes you furious?
What makes you furious?
Yes. Stop being so reasonable. You know what, Muriel? In the end, this is television. It's not. We're not sacrificing lives here. And it does matter.
It does. Yes, of course it matters. And I'm pretty passionate. I think people would tell you. I love the idea that we're offering great stuff for people that they're going to watch. But There's also certain things you can't do much about. You know, as I said, we're faced with some changes. You know, if it was that awful, I could always leave.
Oh, if we'd all said that, the Berlin Wall would still be up. Am I going to...
Muriel, you're incorrigible. You really are, actually.
I'm going to finish off a few questions, but I'm going to open it to the floor just now, just for a few questions. So, anyone got some questions for Richard? Before the microphone will come to you, if you've got a question, if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself first before the question. Can I take some from the floor? I can hardly see you.
I've been too reasonable.
Oh, come on. Yes, gentleman here. Hang on a sec. Thanks.
Hi, it's Stuart Burridge, Airborne TV and Film. Something that Muriel picked up on earlier about some of the great comedies that you've started and they then transfer onto 2.
Yeah.
When they do transfer over to 2, do they stay at 4 budgets or do they move accordingly to 2 budgets?
That is a really good producer's question. Do you know, I don't know, actually. I have no doubt that as soon as they go to BBC 2, anybody who's in them starts demanding more money. It would seem to me to be absolutely true. Whether or not the actual production people, I suspect they probably do go up in budget, actually. It's got to be said that 2012 was largely made when it transferred, which is slightly unusual, I admit that. Normally, the next one gets transferred across before it's actually made. In this case, it was actually made.
Anyone else? Goodness me. Yes, these are here, thanks. And I'll come to you after.
Thank you. It's Cat Lewis, 9 Lives. It's a viewer's question, not a producer's question. Are your drama acquisitions threatened by the cuts?
No, in a civil answer. Borgen 2 and Killing 3 are coming back this autumn and in the early spring. And I the cuts haven't impacted on drama acquisitions as a top line. I think there's something more longer term. There is an issue ultimately because right now, you know, you can't move for a Scandinavian drama, and they're all pretty good. And that's a consequence of, I think, about 10 years of a reconsideration in the Scandinavian countries. They basically I know this, they took a conscious decision, because they weren't making very good stuff, to kind of go back and really think about it and rethink how they did it. And they invested a lot of money into it, and this is the fruit of that period. So they're on a roll, no doubt about that. And there's some great, we've got another drama coming up called Lilyhammer in about 3 weeks' time, which is a hoot. I reckon if you fancy it, it's good fun. It's an American sort of wise guy, mafia guy, who has to go on a witness protection program, and he chooses Lilyhammer. And it's a comedy of culture clash. It's good fun, and I think very watchable. The point is, though that role of great dramas like that, at some point will definitely slow down. It just has to. So from a viewer's point of view, I can't guarantee you that level of excellence forever. I'm looking. The other thing about it is, I think what's also quite interesting about those dramas is people do ask me why those ones. What, is it because we somehow, you know, there's a big interest in Scandinavia, and I think, of course there isn't a particular interest in Scandinavia. Where did that happen? It's more that I think they are, as it were, faintly exotic. So they're a bit like it is here, but dissimilar enough. That's one thing. And secondly, they are beautifully made. They are beautifully constructed and beautifully shot. And in fact, the director of, I think, Killing 2 is actually has been directing in this country and is doing something on BBC 2, as it happens. More feeding.
More feeding. Feed it good.
It wouldn't. I don't think The Killing would have worked if it had been set in Brazil, for example. I just don't think it would have had quite the same cultural relationship to us. But, and I was asked once, you know, why aren't you doing more kind of stuff from elsewhere? Why is it all Scandinavia? And it's because that's the good stuff's coming from Scandinavia. It is true to say that I don't want to. It is quite good that BBC4 reflects international drama in as many ways as possible, and we do it through our feature films. I'm not going to just pick some from everywhere else if they're not good enough. You know, there is a standard that I think has to be maintained, a level of quality and a tone which works. So there's an assurance for you, for what it's worth.
There's a challenge.
So your Saturday nights are safe for a while.
Trying to sell them a Brazilian drama. The lady up here, just thanks.
Someone's going to offer me one. I know that now. It's coming my way. You're going to do it, aren't you? You're going to go, I have one.
I might actually. I'm Manisha. I'm head of PR for Sky Arts.
Fantastic.
I think we all have an incredible respect for BBC4 at Sky Arts. I wish what you said about how much we spent on marketing was true. Actually, my question is slightly unrelated. It's if there's one thing you could commission, you wish you'd commissioned across the board, what would that be?
I thought the Channel 4 Grace and Perry piece was quite good. I'm not sure I'd have commissioned 3. I thought the first one was excellent, and it got slightly less interesting because it always ends up in... I thought the first one was just always asking interesting questions, and the next 2 felt like they were asking more standard questions. So I think that's... as I said, Leonardo live. I'm not convinced... I don't think it has to necessarily be live, as it happens. I know that's a reason for putting it out in cinemas and so on, but I thought that was quite a clever idea to kind of to unpack, an artist in the context of an exhibition and use that exhibition as a studio was an idea I may just steal.
Just one last quick question. Here's this gentleman here, thanks. No, that's it, thank you.
Hi Richard, Jake Cantor from Broadcast Magazine. If your reach does fall,
yes,
how will you address decreasing relevance, or will you have to resign yourself to it?
It's quite hard to be absolutely sure about this sort of thing, but I think share and reach probably will level off or decline slightly. I think. I don't know that, by the way. I will do what I can to make sure that what we play, where we play, gets viewed by as many people as possible. It should be said that one of the reasons why share and reach on the channel has grown in the way that it has is because we have been, I think, very smart about things like acquisitions and about placing things in repeats. And it is just possible that if we carry on in that way, we'll manage to kind of hold the line a bit. I think, though, that 1.7% is our current share average for year on year at the moment, which puts us in the top 5 digital channels in Britain. We're the fastest rising channel in Britain, full stop, this year, if you exclude BBC One HD. And really, which just came online at a pace, so that is slightly different. And whatever you think about those, about 1.7 is big or not, it's in broadcast hours, we're still actually ahead of pretty much all the paper channels too. It means that when you say we're not relevant, we're actually pretty relevant to a lot of people, even if it declines a bit. There's a lot of indication that audiences find things like our originations. We recently had a 3-parter on, it was called The Story of Art in 3 Colours with James Fox on gold, blue and white. It was rather a fantastic piece. 500,000 people watched each of those, and the repeats were getting 300,000 and 400,000. In other words, that means 1 million people might have watched it in the course of a week. That's as good as any arts programming on most other channels, with the exception probably of BBC One, BBC Two.
So there. The future is looking quite bright just now, despite
yes,
other things.
Absolutely.
Let's
Thank
have
you.
a little glimpse of it. Well, Richard, a final personal question. Obviously, rumour mills being what they are, you're having a tough time, you're doing a great job. Are you going to stick around? We hear BBC Two might be having a space with a whole such a thing, Sky, everything. Will you still be here next year?
Yeah, I think so. Sorry, I was saying something. I was watching that. And
no, don't duck the question.
No, I'm not. I'll come back to it. I'm just saying I was watching that, and just to kind of comment on that. And I do one thing I haven't emphasised. They just make me smile. They just make me laugh. I think one of the things that I've tried to do on the channel is to have a good time. So when you were saying why am I so, actually, I just think if we can entertain people, that's quite a good reward. It's quite funny. It's quite enjoyable. Anyway, there you are. Sorry, I advertised that bit. Look, there is no space at BBC Two. I think Janice is doing a fantastic job and having a really great summer, actually, with some very strong shows. As far as I know, you might be able to put me right. There's no opportunities at Sky either. So, but in some ways, it's not really about that, actually. I really love running BBC Four, and I don't say that lightly. It's a fantastic channel to run. It is a place of extraordinary liberty to do whatever I want. there are obviously confinements and so on, but as I think you might, I understood you were going to ask, but you didn't, I made a film about toilets 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was called Toilets, An Unspoken History. It did 1.1 million people, and it was a funny program, as it happens. That's just a rare, that's a rare opportunity, and I love it. And I love the idea of doing things like the story of art through 3 colours. And what a mad idea, 3 colours, the story of gold, the story of blue, the story of white. A beautiful program with the rather wonderful James Fox. So that is lovely, and if I ever did anything else, I would miss that breadth, that's, I mean, television can be a very confining thing, and more so, I think it can be quite a conservative with a small c place, and fear of risk and open to criticism, and 4 is not like that. We should care less.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, he's done a storming job with the channel, and he doesn't much care about anything, would you? Please thank Richard Klein.
Thank you, bless you.